And I want to thank you for taking part in this exclusive Monday morning interview with Jim Rickards, the financial threat and asymmetric warfare advisor for both the Pentagon and CIA. Recently, all 16 branches of our intelligence community have come together to release a shocking briefing that contained an alarming consensus. These agencies, that include the CIA, FBI, Army, and Navy, they've already begun to estimate the impact of the fall of the dollar as the global reserve currency, and our reign as the world's leading superpower being annihilated in a way equivalent to the end of the British Empire post-World War II. And the endgame could be a nightmarish scenario where the world falls into an extended period of global anarchy. Jim Rickards fears he and his colleagues' warnings are being ignored by our political leaders and the Federal Reserve, and we're on the verge of entering the darkest economic period in our nation's history, which is why every American should hear his warnings before it's too late.
There's now concern in different branches of the U.S. government. Historically in Washington, the Treasury and the Fed take care of the dollar. The Pentagon and the intelligence community take care of other threats. But what happens when the dollar is the threat? Americans generally know that the Fed has increased the money supply by $3.1 trillion. We have $17.5 trillion of debt. We have $127 trillion of unfunded liabilities. What are those? Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, student loans, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA. You go through the whole list and it goes on and on and on. There's no way to pay it. During the boom years of the 1950s and 1960s, every dollar of debt that was created, we got $2.41 worth of economic growth. So that was pretty good bang for the buck. But by the stagflation of the late 1970s, that had actually collapsed. So now for a dollar of debt in the late 1970s, we were only getting 41 cents of growth. So obviously that's a huge drop off. You know what that number is today? Today we only get 3 cents of growth for every dollar of debt. So we're piling on the debt, but we're getting less and less growth as that trend goes from $2.41 to 41 cents to 3 cents. It's soon going to go negative. We have enormous distress, but it's being hidden in different ways. The unemployment rate today is actually 23% when you calculate it the right way.
And you point the finger right at the Fed, Congress, the White House?
I actually was in a meeting in the Treasury, and I said to the audience, the Fed and the Treasury are the greatest threat to national security, not Al-Qaeda, not some of the other threats out there, but right here in this building with this group, you people are destroying the dollar, and it's just a matter of time before it collapses. And I testified before the United States Senate about this. I warned the Senate, you know, maybe we can't stop earthquakes on the San Andreas Fault, but nobody thinks it's a good idea to send the Army Corps of Engineers out there and make the San Andreas Fault bigger. But by money printing and credit creation and reckless monetary policy by the Fed, we're making the San Andreas Fault bigger every day. And when you make a complex system bigger, the risk doesn't go up a little bit, it goes up exponentially. So the risk is unimaginable at this time. The collapse hasn't happened yet, but the forces are building up, and that's just about to snap. Let's look at what's actually happening with the velocity of money. It's plunging. It's going down very rapidly. But compare this decline of velocity today to what we saw leading up to the Great Depression. Now, in the depths of the Great Depression, velocity was even lower. But if you compare what's going on today to what happened in the late 1920s, just prior to the Great Depression, there's a very striking resemblance. So it doesn't matter how much money the Fed prints. The Fed is trying desperately to bend the curve. Think of it as an airplane that's coming in for a nosedive. It's crashing, getting close to the ground. The Fed's trying to grab the joystick and pull the plane up out of the nosedive and get it back in the air. But unfortunately, it's not working. We're heading for a crash.
But you're saying we can no longer grow our debt without causing our economy to aggressively slow down. We're barely above water now.
Look at it this way. Americans right now are standing at the very bottom of a tall mountain, Mount Everest, Mount Kilimanjaro. About halfway up the mountain, there's a catastrophic avalanche barreling down towards us. Determining the one snowflake, the one flashpoint that's going to speed this chaos up shouldn't be our focus. Recognizing the severity of the situation and moving to safety should be. So mission one is helping people hold on to what they've got. That's going to be more than half the battle ahead.
Mainstream economists did not see this coming. And then again, they also don't talk very much to mainstream economists about something like this. Did you know that the debt-wise, in terms of debt, the average American has never really recovered from the 2008 meltdown? That's important. Why? Well, because the Fed, according to critics, printed money out of thin air and kept interest rates at zero for about 10 years. So what did Americans do? They pulled out the old credit card and they started borrowing, and they started borrowing, and they started borrowing over the last 10 years. So much so that we've now amassed $15.2 trillion in household debt. We haven't paid down much of what we've borrowed. In fact, we've actually borrowed more. So what happens if there's a downturn now?
If we were properly organized, we would have caught this problem right away and begun at least to have a national conversation about what it means. Well, when that happens, the first thing you do is you use up whatever savings you might have accumulated. The next thing you do is you lean on your family, your friends, your relatives, and you begin to disaccumulate whatever savings they have. And then at the end of that period, when you're getting desperate because nobody is left to help you, then you sell your house, or if you can, you borrow more against your house. Americans have been doing a lot of that. And now you come to a situation where literally you're running out of what you call the conditions, and that makes this very, very painful. It also shows us, that the recovery we all talk about is a recovery for some, like everything else in this economy, but it is not a real recovery for the mass of people.
This market has nowhere to go but down. This cycle is at the very end of its expansion, and we here have a fiscal problem that is utterly out of control at the worst time in the cycle you can imagine. So we're in a different era, and this bubble can't last, and Trump made a terrible mistake embracing it. So I say it's all downhill from here. This was not sustainable, not so supportable.
I don't know.
I know. I know you're not stupid. Regular people. You have high-class people watching this. But you regular people, I know you're not stupid, but you're ignorant to the facts of some things. My job is to get you up to speed so you can make your own choices so you're not ignorant anymore. But I know you're not stupid.
We are ruining the kids. You are a bunch of self-centered, selfish people who cannot make a real decision for the future. I'm proud to be among you. I'm one of them. Look, let me go like this. Went to Lansing today to do some business to get you your answers. And I'm at this Capitol building, and there's a group of fourth graders. And what they taught me was adults don't know nothing. I say, hey, kid, you know what's going on TV and the shutdown and all of this? He said, well, what is it? I said, well, let's say you want a toy, and a toy costs $10, but you only got $2. So you borrow the $8, and you get your toy with the promise you'll pay back $9 for the favor. He said, oh. And I said, well, here's the thing, kid. We're going to have you pay for it. We're going to kick that can down the line, right? Because we don't owe $17 trillion to the Chinese. We owe $1 trillion to the Chinese. We owe $1 trillion to all other foreign nationals, and we owe $15 trillion to our children. The kid says, that doesn't make sense. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you play with your old toy? I said, great question, kid. Why wouldn't you save your money for the toy? Better question, kid. It hurts. I'm not a Democrat by any means. And I'm certainly not a Republican. Something happened to me. I'm a father. But I'm laying in bed thinking, God willing, I'll live to be 65 and I can stop working. Because working blows. But you got to do it. And God, even more willing, I'll live to be 85, which I don't believe, but a guy could pray. That's 20 years. I got a wife. I love her very much. I'd like to retire. If I could have $30,000 a year, 30, just above the poverty level. That's before taxes, okay? Do the math. I need $600,000 cash. Now I got a baby. I'm teaching her numbers. I think she's really smart. And it's not just the dad, she's really smart. And I want to go to college. What's that gonna cost? 200 grand? What's it cost now? 200 grand? $250,000? I need $850,000 cash. And I'm working. And I'm not going to get that. I don't know what to do. So, solutions. I've seen a better fire department in Baghdad because we sent the money over. I've seen it. Remember the water treatment facility outside Fallujah? They never broke ground. Saw it. Never broke ground. $10 billion. That would fix Detroit up spiffy in a jiffy. We wouldn't even be broke. All up and down, it's a waste. You gotta demand more. But what we do really well in this town is the corruption. And that's the part I can't handle.
It's interesting when you look at life and people in general that we don't tend to ask the big questions. We tend to just focus on the little questions. So we'll ask about how much money this costs or how much money I'm earning and all the rest of it. But we don't ask the big question, which is, what is money? And if we don't know what money is, then we can't understand how we're manipulated through the money system and how what we call banking is legalized theft. And because, of course, it doesn't mean it's lawful, if you like. It doesn't mean it's right or just. It just means it operates within the laws that those that control the banking system and at the same time control the political system have passed to allow banks to be legalized, corrupt, robbers of the people.
Because people say to me, well, why would these elite people, why would they crash the stock market when they had lots of money in it? Well, if you know a stock market is going to crash or a commodity is going to crash because you're the one who's going to crash it, then what do? You get out of it just before the crash, you let it crash, and then you buy up vastly greater amounts of that at a few cents on the dollar, and then you increase the confidence and up it goes again, and now you own vast amounts more than you did before.
So again, people should not forget, despite 9 years plus now of rally and economic recovery, government debt just keeps going up with no limit, and consumer debt is higher than ever, even after the lessons of the 2008-9 Great Recession and debt crisis. So again, get ready. When this bubble blows, there is going to be a major debt deleveraging. So the debt crisis is coming. Debt deleveraging is coming. That means deflation is coming. And that means a wholesale great reset in restructuring debt and more so in financial assets coming back down to fair value or lower.
And my focus is on how society can deal with the debt and to explain why society cannot recover from the current depression until it writes down the debts to what can be paid.
Is what you're saying that when the real economy can no longer service that debt, that is when we have a financial crisis? That's when you have a crisis. So it isn't a black swan as such. It's inevitable. It's the magic of compound interest. Just that interest rates grow and accumulate, plus new money creation, grow faster than the economy grows. This means that if economies only grow at 1 or 2%, if they're growing today, all of the economic growth has to be to pay the financial sector. On what, interest payments? On interest alone. It's a phenomenon, and it's inherent in the very mathematics of compound interest. That should be the starting point if you realize that the problem of our time is how can society cope with the debt buildup that has occurred and is keeping the economy from recovering. It's very hard to take people who have a tunnel vision and expand it. That has nothing to do with being smart. It's again, a tunnel vision, a short-termism, and the economy, by living in the short term, is destroying itself in the long term. Well, in the end, there's only one way of solving the problem, and that's to write down the debts. There's no way the debts can be paid, and the only way of freeing the economy from all of this payments that are paid in debt service to the global financial sector is to write down the debts. That's what finally happened in Rome. That was what Jesus' first sermon was all about, wanting to restore the Jubilee year.
I mean, the argument would be you can't keep doing this without any limits to it, because at some point people don't want your currency anymore.
And yet for every $500 billion deficit that the government has spent into the economy, it's created twice as much, $1 trillion in the form of giveaway to the banks. when the Federal Reserve has just created credit to give to the banks to buy their junk mortgages and the cash for trash.
They're saying it's okay to, quote unquote, print money as long as it's going to the banks,
yes.
But you can't print money. The reason I'm going quote unquote is because you don't really have to print it.
Right.
It's just like
tap it into all on a computer keyboard now.
They
don't even have
but they won't create that same kind of money in order to get the real economy going.
They're saying more private debt is the solution. Well, in reality, the problem is private debt, not the government debt. You're only going to be able to spend about 20% of your salary on the goods and services you produce.
And then they wonder why there's no demand in
That's
the economy.
exactly the point. How on earth are Americans going to buy what they produce if they have to pay all the money to the bankers, and the bankers are using this money not to buy goods and services themselves, they're using the money to make yet more loans, to try to get yet more interest, and it's
I'm seeing in my mail now, I'm getting all these, do you want a new credit card ads, or envelopes are coming through again. TV ads for credit cards are in full steam again. So I guess now that the banks have gotten a lot of free money from the Fed, they're going to maybe perhaps start another credit bubble to try to...
There is indeed one entity that has been producing too much money, way too much money, irresponsibly, and that's the banking system that led to the credit crisis. It was the money that has been inflating prices has been the commercial banks, inflating real estate prices, inflating education prices, inflating prices for stocks and bonds that have just had a huge bubble. So the inflationary money creation is by the commercial banks, but it's the banks that are creating money, and somehow people have believed that inflation is very good if what's going up is the price of your home. But then when the price goes down, what's really gone up has been your debt. And what people thought was asset boom and net worth and wealth creation, as Alan Greenspan said, it turns out to be debt creation. And they're left with a massive debt, and it's the private debt that is the residue of the bubble economy that is now the big problem in overlaying the economy. And instead of trying to resolve that problem by writing down the debts to the ability to pay, by writing down housing debts to the real value of the house or the current mortgage, or writing it down to the 1/4 of your income that used to be normal and is normal in other countries, by refusing to roll back the public debt and write it down, the government is pushing austerity here just exactly as the pound is doing in Europe, as the Eurozone is doing. So all you have to do is look at Greece and Spain and Ireland, and you say, is that going to be America's future under this kind of pretense that government debt's bad, bank debt is good, run into more debt, that will save us. It's as if they believe the Americans can borrow their way out of debt.
Don't bail out the creditors, bail out the debtors. Did they learn that lesson? No.
If you look around the world and you look at how much money the global central banks have printed, we look at the world as kind of global M2, which is basically money around the world divided by global GDP. That ratio is the highest it's ever been in world history. It's 110%. You're going to see real inflation happening. This time it's going to be a global phenomenon. It's not going to be, let's say, contained by a sovereign wall or one country's fiscal policy. It's going to be global in its nature. And that's something we really haven't experienced as a world in a very long time.
But the seeds of moving away from US dollar are being sowed. And I think US pressure is the fertilizer.